Okay, yeah. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to this first introductory session on Flutter. Before we actually get started, let me just tell you that this session will be recorded and later will be put up on the IEEE's YouTube channel. So, if you aren't able to attend the full session now, you could always go back and check it out there later. Yeah, if anybody just joined in, you should be able to see a poll in the chat box of whether or not you have Flutter installed. It's totally okay if you don't have it installed, but it's just to get to know if like how many people have it installed right now. So yeah, I think we can get started. So this is the first session from Eureka from IEEE Compsoc, and this is app development with Flutter. And so this session is going to be a hands-on coding session where you will learn about Flutter, create an app with us, and so we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions during the event, please feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand function that Teams provides. And I think one of our presenters will unmute you so that you can ask your question by unmuting your mic. Or if you want, you could just put the question in the chat box and one of our members will get to you. Okay, so I think we can move on to the first slide of the introduction and what is Flutter. So Flutter is Google's open source UI toolkit to create natively compiled applications for mobile, web, and desktop from a single code base. So Flutter was created by Google, but it's a fully open source project. And if you can see open source, I've linked there, and that link will take you to the GitHub repository where Flutter is stored. So basically, people like you and me, we can contribute to creating new features in Flutter. And so that's one really cool thing about Flutter. And so it implements most of its system in Dart, which is a modern and concise object-oriented programming language. So Dart is a fairly modern programming language. It first was used in late 2011, and it takes advantage of its object-oriented nature. So basically, we can use classes and objects, which are extremely important to Flutter and how everything works in Flutter. So I think we can go to the next slide and just tell them what the advantages of Flutter are. So now let's imagine that I am a developer, right? And so if I had to create an app, if I wanted to create apps, usually I would if I had to create apps for like say multiple platforms, if I wanted to create an app for Android and for iOS and for say desktop, I would have to maintain 3 individual code bases. Uh, so like that would be very tedious to maintain all those code bases. And if I want to make updates to like the app, if I want to like, introduce a new feature, I'd have to introduce it on all 3 code bases, right? So one of the great advantages of Flutter is that it helps in creating applications for Android, iOS, web, Windows, Mac, and Linux platforms, all from a single code base. So you could write your code once and you could deploy it to all these different kinds of platforms using the single code base. So another thing is hot reload functionality. So basically, when you create applications on the web, if you make a change to your code in the web, what you have to do is simply hit the reload button on your browser, and your features would be it would be seen on the front end or on your browser screen immediately. So all you have to do is hit a reload button. But previously for app development for mobile apps, that was not the case. What you had to do was you had to go through the entire build process again. When you even make a small change to your code, you would have to build the app entirely again from scratch and then run the app again. So what Flutter provides is the hot reload functionality, which basically means that if you make small changes to your application, it doesn't have to go through the whole building process again. What happens is it simply makes the changes immediately on the screen, and you can immediately see the changes that you make on the screen, right? Yeah. So and again, Flutter it's very simple to learn. The structure of the Flutter language, the structure of how Flutter is developed, it has a very elegant structure and makes it very easy for a beginner to get basic app up and running. Okay, and it helps you make beautiful apps come to life with minimal code, and so you don't have to create like the boilerplate for almost everything that you want to add into an application is already provided to you by Flutter. And so with minimal code, you're able to make beautiful apps come to life. And finally, it's an open source tool. And so what that basically means is that contributors from all around the world, it doesn't have to be like from one company or one development group. Anybody from the world could, come together and develop a new feature for Flutter, and that's what makes it so such a popular framework now. So I think we'll go on to the next slide. So yeah, just before we get started, like I said, we are going to be building an application. And so I just want to show you a gist of what we're going to be building, just the end product of what we're going to be having, just so that you guys can see what we will be building. So if someone can confirm that this phone screen is visible.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, yeah. So this is the app that we're going to be building. It's it's what we call a number trivia app. And so we will be teaching you step by step on how to create this entire thing from scratch. Sorry. And so if you give it a second, yeah. So here's the number trivia app. This is basically the whole UI, and we'll be implementing every single aspect of this. We'll be writing code to create this whole thing. So basically what this application does is if I give it a random number and I hit get trivia, what this application does is it retrieves data from the internet. So it's basically an interesting fact about this number. So that's the fact that we're going to be obtaining from the internet, and we're displaying it over here in our application. So basically what we can do is we can give it any random number, and it will tell you an interesting fact about that number. And so how we are getting from, say, the very first piece of code that I think Anirudh will show you in very soon, to getting to this part, we'll be walking you through every step of the way. And if you have any doubts, you're always free to ask that. So I think we could move on to explaining what widgets are. And if there are any questions so far, you could put it in the chat box, or you could raise your hand, and one of us will unmute you so that you can speak. So I think, Anirudh, you can present your screen again. And yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, cool. So first, I'll be talking about widgets in Flutter. So yeah, let's get started. So what are widgets in Flutter? So in Flutter, in a Flutter app, every element on the screen that you see, whether it's an app bar, whether it's a button, a text box, say some colors or an icon, everything is a widget. So in fact, even the Flutter app is a widget itself. So the view of the screen and the layout of the UI, everything depends on the choice of the widgets chosen by the developer. Now, each widget has a few properties associated with it, which can be changed by the developer based on his or her requirements. For example, some properties that could be tweaked is, say, the color of a widget, or say the height or width of a widget, or the contents of a widget, or say a child property which can be changed, which we will look into a bit later, right? So most widgets also have the child property, which allows us to have nested widgets and form a tree of widgets. The structure of the code of an app is a tree of widgets in a Flutter application. So this will probably be a little more clear in the next slide. So yeah, this is a simple example of how a typical Flutter app would look. So this is just a demo, hypothetical app that I've built over here, or I've displayed. So up here we have our main widget. Each rounded rectangle is actually a widget, and all the labels beside these arrows are actually properties of widgets. So if we look at this app, we have first our main parent widget, which is a material app widget. Now this material app widget has the property home, which in this case we're setting to be a scaffold. Now the scaffold widget has various different properties, like an app bar, it has a body property, it has a floating action button property. It has various different properties, and you can actually see all the different properties that each widget has on the official Flutter documentation. But yeah, so some of the properties that we could set would be an app bar, and the app bar property is set to an app bar widget. Now, similarly, the app bar widget has various properties that can be set, like the background color, the title, and yeah, there are many other properties, but yeah, these are a few examples. Now, the background color property can be set to a color widget, and similarly here, the title property can be set to a text widget. And yeah, we have a similar structure here on the right for the body. So this is a simple example of how a Flutter app and how a Flutter app is, and how? As you can see, everything here is a widget. So we have our main widget, which has properties, which again has sub-widgets. And yeah, so each and everything that is visible on the screen in a Flutter app is a widget. So let's take another simple example. So this is an example of a simple counter that I'll be building right now as a demo. Uh, so we have here the main material app, which is, like we had seen before, is our main parent widget, which has the property home. And this home is set to be a scaffold again over here, the scaffold widget. Now the scaffold widget has properties like the app bar, body, and floating action button, which we are all setting to their respective widgets over here. So yeah, let's actually, I'll actually open Android, sorry. Let me actually open Android Studio. For those of you who have Flutter already installed and Android Studio already installed, you guys can open Android Studio and code along with me. For the rest of you, you guys, I'll be sharing the code in the chat as I go along, and you guys can run it on a website called dartpad.dev. So let me just, if you guys just Google dartpad, the first link will take you to a page like this, and you can just clear all the code, and I'll be sharing the code on the chat. And for those who have installed Android Studio, you guys can follow along. Right. So as I said, a Flutter app is a widget. So what we will do to create our main widget is we will type actually stless. So our main Flutter app will be a stateless widget. Now I'll get into what is stateless widgets and stateful widgets a little later. But for now, we have our stateless widget, which is our main Flutter app. And yeah, this is just some starting code for that. We'll name it counter app. Right now, this widget is this counter app is returning an empty container as the app. So yeah, before we actually get started, we need to import some libraries. So we need to import some prerequisites for us to be able to access these widgets. Right. So as we have seen in the previous slide, so our main widget is a material app widget. So here our function is basically returning the app. So we'll have our main material app widget. And inside the material app widget, we have the home property. And as you guys could see, the home property actually expects us to pass in a widget into it. So here we will be passing in the scaffold widget into the home property of the material app. Now the scaffold widget has properties like the app bar, say the body, and also another thing that we'll be using is a floating action button. Right now we'll be making a simple counter app as a demo to explain widgets and stateful and stateless widgets. Later you guys will be building the actual trivia app that Igjot will take you guys through. So yeah, so the app bar property here will be set to an app bar. And the app bar has properties like the title, which we will set to a text widget. Let's call it, say, counter app. And also we will center the title. So these are title, center title. These are all various different properties of the app bar widget, just like how app bar, body, floating action button are all properties of the scaffold widget. Right. So in the body property, if you guys could see the structure over here, so we have basically built this app bar side over here. We have an app bar property which is set to an app bar, which has a title and which has a text inside it. So the body property, we will add a center widget, which will basically center everything inside it. And that center widget will have a child with some text, which will be displaying our count. So let's have our center widget. And this center widget will have a child. And this child will be set to some text. And this text will be, for now, I'll just set it to counter value and set that to be 0. Right. So let's actually comment out this floating action button.
Anirudh? Yeah, could you go a bit slower? I think some people in the call are having issues with the speed.
Right, sure.
Yeah, thanks.
So would you guys like me to go back Would you guys like me to go back a bit or to continue from here?
I mean, I think you could just explain a little bit again about
yeah,
the
I'll
whole
probably
app
go.
part and stuff.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, maybe I'll actually just run this on the dartpad, so you guys could actually maybe just see what's happening, and then I'll explain it again a bit more clearly. So let me just share this. One second. Okay, maybe I'll just 1 second. Yeah, how do I share code snippets again?
3 dots and then code.
For some reason, I can't see the code option over here. Can you guys see?
Anirudh, it's fine for now. I think you can just go ahead and explain the difference between stateful and stateless, and we can do the code sharing later.
Okay, cool. So I'll just run this on Dartpad, and you guys can just see what's happening. Yeah.
Main function, Anirudh. The main function.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, right now we've just defined the actual app, but we are not calling the app anywhere. So we'll have our void main function, which in which we will call the run app function, which will actually run our counter app. So hopefully right now we see a material app. Yeah, so as you can see, we have a material app here. That's our main parent widget, which has a scaffold. Now this scaffold has the properties app bar and body, which we have set to right now. This app bar is, as you can see, this is the app bar widget up here. And this app bar widget has some text embedded inside it. Now the body has a center tag, which is centering everything inside it. And as a child, we have set it to some text. And for now, we've set the text to counter value 0. So is this clear? If you guys can maybe tell in the chat if it's clear so far. Okay, there's not any response, but so yeah, let's just add the floating action button that we wanted. Now the floating action button we will set to be a floating. Are those brackets or near home? No, those are open. Yeah, these are not flower brackets. These are opening normal. Yeah, it's a normal opening bracket, not a flower bracket. Yeah. So yeah, we'll set it to be a floating action button widget. And this floating action button widget requires us to set a property on pressed, which basically tells us what we need to do when this button is pressed. So right now, as you can see, like this app does nothing. It's just a static page. If you run this again, you'll just see that the only difference is now we have a button down here, right? So what we want to do is, yeah, just before that, I'll just add another couple of things. I'll add a child to the floating action button to be an icon. And I'll set that icon to be an add icon. And also to the text, we'll add some styling. So just how the text widget has the property in which we can set some text to it, and we can also set a styling to the text that we are to the text, and we can set properties like the font weight to be say bold, and this will be Igjot will be explaining this a little more in detail when he's doing when he's actually building the actual app. But for now, you guys can yeah, font size will set this to be 20. Now, what we want to actually do is we want to have a counter app. So what we want is this counter value here that's being displayed on the app to increase every time we press this button here. So that's the whole point of the counter app. So what we might want to do is we have say a counter variable. We'll set that to 0. And instead of actually hard coding the value, 0 here, what we can do is reference the counter value. And what we can try to do is on when the button is pressed, we can maybe set the counter value to counter value +1. So maybe this makes sense to you guys, hopefully. But let's see if this actually works. We'll see in a bit that it actually doesn't work. As you can see, it's throwing an error here saying that this class is marked as immutable, but one or more of its fields aren't final. So this is actually referring to the fact that this widget that we have set is a stateless widget, but we are actually having variables inside it, and properties inside the stateless widget are changing. So to actually understand what this error is, let's actually go back to the slides and see what are stateless widgets. So stateless widgets are widgets that do not change. So if you guys noticed, until we added this variable, like if you just get rid of this variable and this set this back to 0 and just run this, you can see that nothing on this page. Yeah, you can see that nothing on this page is a variable. Everything is a constant, and everything is it's a static page. But as soon as we added the variable, some properties of it began to change. So a stateless widget is a widget that does not change. All of its components are constant during runtime, and yeah, none of the components are variable. So the syntax for making a stateless widget, as we had seen earlier in Android Studio, is like this. In Android Studio, there are a lot of shortcuts which will yeah, help you get this starting code for making a stateless widget. Now, let's talk about stateful widgets. These are widgets that do change with during the runtime. So some of the properties of the widgets are variable, and they're not constant during runtime. So the syntax for making a stateful widget is a bit more involved, but yeah, but in Android Studio, again, we have a shortcut for getting a the starting template for making a stateful widget, sorry. So for now, actually, let's just get rid of all this stuff that we added. Yeah, so this was our static app that we had built. So let me just cut out this material app part for now. This was our main widget and paste it down here. And let's actually delete our stateless widget. So now what we need is a stateful widget. Since we want actually stuff in the widget to change, we wanted the number property to change. So let's again call this counter app. So if you're doing this on Android Studio, it will automatically set a lot of these things for you guys. Otherwise, you'll have to make sure the names are consistent throughout. Now, if we copy back our app that we had built that time, and we paste it back in here, we will see that actually if we run this again on Dartpad, if we run it, nothing would have changed. But yeah, the only difference is now that we have a stateful widget and not a stateless widget. So we can actually change things inside this. So let's actually go back and add the code to update this 0 value here when we press the button. So what we will do for this is we will have a variable int counter value, and we will set that to be 0. And instead of hard coding the value 0 here, what we will do is we'll add a $sign, and yeah, we'll reference the actual variable value over here. So if this was set to 5, the text would display counter value set to 5. Now, yeah, let's actually fix that. Yeah, so now what might make sense for what might make sense is every time the button is pressed, we just increment the counter value. So what we are expecting to happen is when the floating action button is pressed, this function is called. That's what the onPressed property does. It tells the Flutter framework what needs to be done when the floating action button is pressed. What happens is the counter value gets incremented, and what we would expect is the counter value to be updated, the actual text to be updated, since counter value is being incremented. So let's actually just print the counter value to the console and just see what is happening. Right. So let's again copy this and run it on Dartpad. Yeah, so if I open the console here, so every time I press the button, you can see that actually nothing is happening over here. This is not updating, but you can see that it is properly incrementing the value of the counter value. So the counter value is getting incremented in the console when we are printing it here. But for some reason, it is still showing the outdated 0 value, the original value. It is not updating. So to understand why this is happening, we'll have to again look at another function called setState. So setState is a function that notifies the framework that some internal state of the widget has changed, and and it needs to rebuild the widget. So basically, what happens is when we call setState is the Flutter framework rebuilds the entire widget to display all the updated changes. So basically, the thumb rule is anytime you want any changes to be visible on the screen due to some user action, you would call setState. SetState requires us to pass in a function into it, which will specify what and all updates we want to happen during that rebuilding of the widget. So all we have to do now is actually add the function setState, and instead of incrementing the counter value out here, what we will do is we will increment the counter value inside setState, so that every time the counter value is incremented, the entire widget is rebuilt, and so the new updated value of counter value will be displayed on the screen. So now if you run this, you will see that both the value in the console as well as on the screen should be updating now, like you can see. So I hope you guys kind of understood how widgets work, how they are nested inside each other, and what are the differences between a stateless and a stateful widget. Summarizing again, stateless widgets are widgets which are static and they don't really change during runtime, whereas as you could see here, this was a stateful widget, as the text property here was changing during runtime due to some user action. Also, inside your stateful widget, every time you want to make any changes to the actual appearance, or you want the changes that you make to be actually visible, you will have to call the setState function, and you will have to specify all the updates inside the setState function. So yeah, so Igjot will be using all of these things again later. So if it's a little bit unclear now, hopefully it becomes a little bit more clear during the actual hands-on session. So yeah, now Nishant will be explaining asynchronous programming, which will be required for the app that we'll be building today. Nishant, are you here?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Anirudh. So basically what we saw up till now is just a sample application, just to get the feel of how things work in Flutter. And so the actual app we'll be building is exactly what we showed you in the beginning of the session. So yeah, now the way we got the information from the internet was using a concept called asynchronous programming. And so I need to explain this in order for you to understand how we're going to be making those requests and how we're going to be getting that data. So what async programming is short for the word asynchronous. And so it allows statements to be executed outside the main program flow. And so I'll get into that in a second. The next slide will show it to you. But every async request is associated with what's called a promise. And so how you have objects in most programming languages, a promise is also a kind of an object, but this is an object that will produce a value in the future. And so the promise is that it can return a value in the future that we will have to resolve. So depending on whether the asynchronous call is successful or rejected, there will be different outputs or different values that you will get. So what an asynchronous call basically does is it is used to obtain data or fetch some data from like the internet or from your local file system. And so when you make a call to the internet, or when you request to get some data from the internet, that will usually take time, right? And you don't want your program waiting on that to come in. You want some, you might want some other things to be executed at the same time while your program is waiting for that request to come in. And so, yeah, that's where you use asynchronous programming. And so, yeah, I think if you go to the next slide, I could just show them a little. Yeah. So what synchronous programming is, like for say programming languages like Python, what you have a set of statements one after the other, right? So if you have like a variable declaration and then a print statement, the variable declaration will run first, and then once the variable declaration is done, then the print statement will run. So basically, what happens in synchronous is a request is made, then the response is given, then the second request run, and then the second response is obtained. Now, what we have in asynchronous programming is if we know that this request will take time, what we could do is we could initiate a second request before we get the response of the first one itself. And so that's what asynchronous programming is on the right side. You can see that request 1 is sent and request 2 is sent before we get the response of the first one. And so that's why we can send 2 requests and we can get the responses whenever it is done. And so since Dart supports asynchronous programming, what we could do is we could simply add the keyword async to a function definition and create asynchronous calls within the function. So I think you can go to the next slide, Anil. Yeah, so I've got a little snippet over here. So yeah, so asynchronous programming in Dart. So yeah, that's why I just said that it supports asynchronous programming, and the await keyword will request and it will wait for a response to be generated from that request. Now, so what you can do is when you make an asynchronous call, either you can get that value after some time, which is a successful request, or you could get an error saying that maybe the URL that you've given is wrong, or maybe there was some error that occurred while you were retrieving that data, so you will get an error from there. So what you can do is while you're waiting for that response, you can use the await keyword, and it will wait until the response is generated from that request. And so this is a little code snippet from what we'll be building later. Right now, you don't have to understand what this is doing. I just want to show you the basic method of how you define an asynchronous function. And so this future keyword is something we'll get into on the next slide. But as you can see on the first line, the last word, async, allows you to create this function that is asynchronous. So you could use the keyword await. So you could basically implement asynchronous programming in this function. And so what this does is it is awaiting a response from this URL. So what we're doing is we're requesting for some data from this URL, and we're going to be getting that data back. And then that response will be awaiting for a response from this URL. So whether we get the data or we get an error, we will have to wait until that value comes in. So I think we can go to the next slide. So yeah, if you remember, we just saw keyword future in that code snippet, and so future is a keyword in Flutter, and future is an object where yeah, right. So future is an object that represents a delayed computation, which will represent a potential value or error in the future. So basically, what this does is it implements asynchronous programming in Flutter. So we are expecting some value to come back for this object. And so that's why we define it with the future, the keyword future. And so the future can be completed in two ways. Either it succeeds with the value or it fails with an error, right? And so what you can do when you are defining this function, when you're defining a function that relates to a future, maybe like if you say you're waiting for some information to come, you could use so basically a future has a property that is waiting. So when you're waiting for a response, there'll be a property of this future that is waiting for a response to come in. And so you could maybe display like a loading screen or something while the value is while we're waiting for the value or while the value is loading. And once you get a value, maybe then you can do something with that value, display that value on the screen. And so that's how one way of which the future can be completed with a value. Or if there's an error, you can also create what's called a callback for that error. So it's basically a function that you can define. And if there's an error, you can display that also on the screen saying that there is an error. And So yeah, there's also one case where a future maybe it might not ever complete, which is when there is no value returned and neither is there any error returned. And so in that case, there are no callbacks that are created. So basically, that is what futures are. They are just representing delayed computations, and that is just we're waiting for a value to come in from some other place, and once that value comes in, we'll see what to do with that value. So yeah, I think we can actually get started on with the actual app building. And so I think Ikjot and Shravani will take over from here. And so basically, I remember seeing on the chat box that there were some people who were trying to code with Visual Studio Code. And I think that's also fine. You can code along with Visual Studio Code. It's just that you'll have to be running it from an emulator, and that might take up too much of your computer's resources. So you can code along for now, but if you want to see what the output is, I'd recommend using Dartpad itself. So yeah, I think Ekjot and Shravani can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Nishan. Oh, guys, if you
Yeah. So
anything.
yeah, Shravani, just a second.
Yeah.
Guys, hi, I'm Ikjot, and I'm a fourth semester student. So what we're going to do now, I think Nishant had explained in the starting. And while we're going through the app building process, do not worry if you don't understand something. Please ask in the doubts in the comment section, and we'll get to you. So yeah, Shravani will start with the basic layout process, and I'll code along with her.
Yeah.
Shravani.
So we'll be building the layout of the app first, and then we'll be adding the functionality. So at any point, if you don't understand, don't worry, or just put up a message on the chat. We'll get back to you. Yeah, let's start. So the topmost line where it says import some package from Flutter, it's basically, we don't add the entire functionality of each widget that's already there in the material dot package. So we just import those. Yeah. And then we have the void main function. Whenever you run any type of program, the code, the first function that will be executed is the main program. So inside that we have run app, and our app is called as my app. So we'll be running my app, and then we don't want our entire app to change, when you click on that button. So we are going to make it as a stateless widget. So the entire thing, the block of the code from 7th to 11th line will be regarding that. And then we want the, we are going to build only a single page app. So we are going to use the material app, and then the home page will, we are going to use only one single page. So that will be called as my home page. For now, we are going to use only that. And then we want.
Hold on one second. Ekjot, could you just quickly just run them through the process of creating a project in Flutter? You don't have to like actually create it. Just show them the steps on how to do that. Just from the command line, I guess.
And also maybe just share the starting code that you have with them. So everything that you add from now, they can code along.
Sure. Okay, so guys, basically what you can see in front of you is the main file, the main.dart file, which gives us the entire code, which gives us the basic starting code for the app. So whenever you create a new project, right, you have to go on this file tab and you click on new. And then there's two options in front of you called new project or new Flutter project. So we are making a Flutter project, so you can click on new Flutter project. So once you do that, all these files, which you can see, they're basically directories, which is nothing but folders. So they get created with these files in them, and you can start building your app from there itself. So that's the basic idea, and this is the main file. So if you take all this code and run it in Dartpad, what you should see is an empty screen for now, but I'll share it with you nonetheless. Shravani, I think just a second, let me share it with them and then we can go on. Yeah.
Yeah, we were at my homepage. So we are going to.
Maybe 1 second before you continue, let's just see if they set it up.
Yeah. Let's wait for 2 more minutes.
Anirudh, were you able to create a new Flutter project? Maybe you can type it on the chat. Yes, I got it. Cool. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead now, Shravani.
Yeah.
Ikjot, did you send the code in?
I can get it. You
Yeah,
want to see?
Anirudh, there is a lot of boilerplate code. You can delete that. Or you
Yeah,
can
and
just
you
copy
can replace it
the
with
code we
this
have.
code. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, Shravani, I think you can go ahead.
Yeah, we want our home, my home page, whatever the things, whatever the widgets on our home to be responsible. So we'll create the home page to be a stateful widget. As Aniruddha has shown, whenever you click on that button, there is a change in the home screen. So that is called a stateful widget. That is kind of responsible, for creating the responsible widgets. So the second line over here, my homepage state, create state, that's basically creating an instance of the homepage. That's the initial screen, whatever you see. And then you will add the functionality later. So uh, we want an app bar and a body in our app. So we'll be making a good use of the scaffold widget. The app bar is kind of the blue thing on the top of your home screen, whatever you see. So you can add the title in that also.
Okay, sure, I'll do
In,
that.
yeah, inside the app bar, we are going to use a title, and it's going to be a text widget with my number trivia app as text in it, and just a bit styling stuff. You want the text to be in the center of the app bar, so you're going to set the center title property to be true. And then, as you have seen earlier, uh, there are some three widgets where the user is going to give input to the app. And then there is a number trivia button. And then there is one more widget, which you can't see right now. There, the app will be displaying the result to the user. So, okay, we want all of those three widgets, the widget where the user types in the input, and the number trivia, I mean, get trivia button, and also the response where the what the user gets to be stacked one upon another. So the first widget will be the text form field widget. This allows the user to type in the number. Yeah. And then the next one will be the button, which we are going to use as a raised button. You'll know more about the buttons if you read the official docs. And then there is one more widget, the text widget, basically where the user gets the output. We'll be adding the functionality for raised button and all that later. Yeah, this is it for the we want some text in the raised button. Whenever you want to nest like two or more widgets on one another, you use the child property. Yeah. The text will be get review. Yeah. And for now, we are not going to add any on pressed functionality.
Yeah, so I think if we go ahead and run this on our Dart pad, um, we should see something kind of similar to what we had seen in the beginning. Let me just run it. Yeah, so it's as you see, it's something similar to what we had started with in the beginning, what Nishant had shown. So this is basically a button, and this is where the result will be displayed, and this is like a place where you can enter some text or whatever you want to. So I think we can now move on to the functionality part. Shravani, is that fine?
Yeah, that is fine. If you have any doubts regarding widgets and how this works, you can ask on the chat box or you can unmute yourselves.
So guys, I have sent the code till now, what we have written, and you can uh, put that on the dartpad and see how it works. So I think now I'm going to start building the actual functionality of the app. That is, we'll try and get the data from the internet and display it in the fashion that we had shown before. So what we have right now is a text form field, which is nothing but like a text field where you can enter some text. And this is where the user will enter the number that he's looking for, that he's looking some interesting facts about. So like suppose if you enter 43, the app should return some interesting facts about the number 43. So this is where that will happen. The raised button is basically what you click and then you fetch the data and you show it on the screen. And this is where we'll actually display all our results. So since when the app is opened, we can't display any result because the user hasn't requested for anything yet. So what we display right now is result is here. But we want to actually show some different data once the request has been made. So suppose the user enters 43 and presses the raised button. So we should return back the interesting fact that we found. So this widget, text widget, has to change, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another widget and I'm going to call it, let's say, the current status. So this widget will do nothing but it'll keep a track of what is supposed to be displayed right now. So in the starting of the app, it might display something like your result will be displayed here. Right? So in the starting of the app, we wanted to show that. So if I put that widget over here, which says current status, it should work. So I'll just do this and show it to you in the dartpad that it really works. And once we run it, you can see that this line will appear there. Yeah, so your result will be displayed here. As you can see, it has been updated. So now, once this button is clicked, this raised button, we want to actually change this widget current status and actually go ahead and display the interesting fact that we found. So for that, there's a property for every button that's called on pressed. And this basically means that whenever a button is pressed, what should we do? So over here, we will add all the functionality. So let's go ahead and create a function that says button pressed. So button pressed. And we'll take an actual input from this. Actually, let's leave that for now. Let's go ahead with the button pressed. So whatever happens is when we press this raised button, this function should be called. So over here, we will actually use this function button pressed. So we will do button pressed. Right. So in this button pressed function, if I add some functionality like print the button was pressed, then what we want is the console should display what we have just done. So if I run the app and I'll show it to you in the console, what happens. So this is our console and let's say I press this button. So as you can see, it says that the button was pressed. So our on pressed function is working. So that's fine. Now let's go ahead and actually try to simulate the fetching of data. So for that, what we need is something called a future builder. And before we go into that, you might be wondering about one more thing. So we have a text field where the user can enter some data over here, like suppose some number 56. But how do we get to know what the data is? How do we get to know what the number is? So for that, there is something called a text editing controller. And don't worry about it if you don't get it right now. It's just something that will help us identify what the user has actually entered over there. So I'll just make a new text editing controller and I'll pass it to this text form field. So it has a controller property where we can put our controller, which we just created. So this basically helps us to identify what the current text in the text field is. So we have this. Now the button pressed, we want to pass some data to the internet, like the number 56, so that the internet understands that, okay, this user has requested for an interesting fact about the actual number 56. So for that, we can just give it an argument that says string number, and it'll basically yeah, so it'll basically do one thing, that it'll know what number was there in the text field when the button was pressed. So we can pass in that number over here as well. So underscore controller dot text is what we use, and this gives us the actual current number input in the text form field. So I'll actually I'll give a demo for this, and I'll share the code with you right now. So the number pressed, number entered was let's say the number which we have received just now. So we'll okay. So I think if we test this now, it should work. So let's run this first. Right. So let me just enter something like 34. And when I press this get trivia, let's see what happens. So it recognized that the number entered was 34. And this is happening just because of this one thing called a text editing controller, right? So let me just share this code with you in the chat box. Yeah, so this is the code which we have right now. So, okay. I think now we're ready to go on to the actual simulation part. So when we press the button, right, what we want to happen is
maybe you could give them a second just to make sure they were able to run it, just so they can follow along. Maybe a couple of minutes break, and then you can continue.
Sure, guys.
Also, if any doubts you guys have, you can unmute yourselves. If there's any issue with running the code at all, please either unmute yourselves or put it in the chat box and we'll get to you. Yeah, I think we can move on with the...
All right. Yeah, okay, cool. So guys, as I was saying, basically what we want now to happen is when we press the button, the actual result should be displayed here, right? So as Nishant had mentioned in the starting, when we fetch some data from the internet, it takes some time to reach us. And that's obvious because it's not on our local system, so it takes some time to get it. So what do we do in that time when the data is being fetched? So you must have used multiple apps in your lifetime, and you might have seen that there is something called a circular progress indicator, which is basically nothing but something that runs like this. And I can actually show you right here what a circular progress indicator is. So if I run it again, you'll be able to see. Okay, I don't know why it's stuck right now, but I think we can go ahead and I'll show it to you while we are actually in the process of the displaying that. So as I was saying, we want to display that progress indicator when our data is being actually fetched from the internet. So what we use in that case is something called a future builder. So we want our current status to be a future builder in that case. And do not worry, I'll explain everything about a future builder to you in just a second. So a future builder it takes in two parameters. So one is a future. A future is something that you're fetching from the internet. Like for example, we're fetching this data, so that's a future for us right now. So it takes a function as the parameter for that, and we'll build that function right now. It'll return a string because the data or the trivia which we get from the internet will be a string. So a future string, and we can call it get trivia, right? So we call it get trivia, and again, when we send the request to the internet, we want basically we want to know what the number is. So we want to show the internet what the number actually is. So again, we'll be taking this number as an input parameter to this input argument to this function. And for now, what we'll do is we just have a sort of a simulation kind of thing, because we can't do that right now, the actual call. And once the simulation is done, we'll actually go on to the actual call and how the data is actually fetched as well. So this future.delayed is nothing but the app waits for some time, like a couple of seconds. So this duration is where you can specify how much time you want the app to wait. So when you're waiting, it's actually like you're waiting for something from the internet. So in this case, we're not waiting for anything, but just to simulate the actual feeling of that, we're going to be using a future.delayed. And in duration, we can add a seconds parameter. So like in second, we can add 2 seconds, like a duration of 2 seconds, right? So this should wait for 2 seconds, and then we can return something for now that let's say our number which we have is a good number. But what we didn't think of is the fact that we need to use this async keyword, because this is not synchronous programming, this is asynchronous programming. So we have to do this await over here, and then everything is good because we are doing asynchronous programming right now. So we added this async and await keyword. And so our future is ready. This is our future function, and it's ready now. So we can add it to our future builder. So this will take in our get trivia thing. So yeah, so now our future is ready. So I said there were two parameters for a future builder. One is future, and one is the actual builder. So that's the name, future builder. So there are two parameters. So the builder is what will be shown to us, like the UI. So the UI, it depends on whether the data has been fetched or not. So this is where we figure that out and actually display something. So let's go ahead. For now, let's just return a container or something. But we're going to be returning something useful right now. So there are multiple cases here. So one case is that we are still fetching the data from the internet, or in this case, we are still waiting for this get trivia function to finish. So if so how do we figure that out, whether we're still waiting or not? So how we do that is by something called, this is actually a snapshot. And it doesn't matter what you name it, but I prefer this name. So so how you figure that out, whether we're still waiting, is by using this function. So it's called connection state. It's not a function exactly, but it's like a property. So if snapshot.connection state is connection state.waiting. So as you can probably understand, this is something that makes sense on its own. So if the snapshot is basically our current status. So whether we are still waiting for the data from the internet, or we have actually received the data from the internet. So connection state basically tells us what is the current status of our request. So if it's in the waiting status, then what we can do is we can return that circular progress indicator that I was talking about, because it will let the user know, hey, your data is still being fetched right now, and once it's fetched, we'll display it to you. Now, if this is not the case, that means our data has been fetched. Now, again, there are two cases. One is, as Nishant explained, it was a successful call or there was an error. So how do we figure that out? If the snapshot that we have received now, so our snapshot is with us now because we are not in the waiting state. So now if our snapshot.data, this is basically the data we received from the internet. If this is null, like nothing was returned, that means that there was some error. So what we can do in this case is we can just return something like a text widget, and we can put some string inside it that says like, hey, there was some error. So we'll just put there was an error. Now, if this is not the case, then what we can do is we can just return the text with the actual data that we receive. So snapshot.data is the actual data we will receive. But if that's null, then we know that there was some error. So a snapshot.data is our current uh, what we have received from the internet. So I think all our cases are done for now, and we can just remove this return container, which I had explained. Yeah. So now, again, since we are actually waiting for the screen to change, as Anirudh had explained at the beginning, we need to use the set state function. So I'll just call the set state, and I'll put this inside that so that it's easy to, so that the UI gets changed as we want it to. So now our current status will be this future builder. All right. So I think we can even remove this functionality for now. And yeah, I think we're good. So yeah, I think I can go ahead and try to actually run this, and we can see if it works. All right. So let's see. Let me enter something like 45. See, so basically this is just a simulation of how it will work, but you can see that we are getting close to what we intended. So again, I think you look at this UI and you think it's ugly. So let's just fix that a little bit as well. So they're very close by, right? So what we do in that case is we add some padding to each of them. A padding is nothing but giving some space around each widget. So this widget will get some more space around it. This widget will get some more space around it, and this widget will get some more space around it. So again, since we have Android Studio, it's really easy. What you do is you click on this, like you put your cursor over here and you press Alt Enter, and you can just select wrap with padding. And you do the same for all of them, wrap with padding and wrap with padding. So it automatically does all of that for you. So now if we go ahead and it again, it might look a little bit better because there'll be more space between each widget. So as you see, there's a little bit more space. So I think I'll share this code with you now again, and you guys can try it out on your own dartpad or any place. Also, guys, please feel free to ask any doubts that you have. You can even unmute yourself. There's no problem. Just you can ask, and I'll wait for a minute here, and then we can go ahead after that. Nishant, one thing I wanted to ask, is it fine if I just go through with the HTTP part as well? Because it's just, I think it'll be a little quicker.
Yeah. Yeah, we could go ahead with that. And maybe I can just share the presentation at the end if they want to go through that
Sure.
part of it.
Sure. Okay, I don't know why there is some sort
if
of.
you want to debug that, I think you can debug that now. I could just go ahead and just explain web APIs really quickly. You think that's fine?
Yeah, but the issue is I'm not able to show my phone screen right now. I don't know. There's some sort of an error with this SCRCTY.
Okay.
Let me try.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
have
so
another method.
you could try doing it with like maybe connecting your phone in. By the time I could explain web APIs really quickly.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Uh, so let me just present my screen real quick. So yeah, so basically what we're doing now is what we have now is just a simulation of what would really be the case, right? We are delaying the application for 2 seconds and then we're displaying some result. But what we really want happening is we want to make a request basically to a server and we want to fetch some data and we want to display that data on our application, right? And so what we are doing in that case is we are basically using what are called web APIs. So the first question I'm going to address, what is an API? API stands for an application programming interface. So basically it allows you to interface between different applications. For our case, we'll be using web APIs, which allows our applications to interact with the internet or the web, which we call. So what we have in web APIs are basically client-side and server-side APIs. Client-side APIs are usually the Java, like the browser extensions that you guys have. That's not really of relevance now because we're using server-side APIs, which we're going to use. We're going to connect to the internet and we're going to retrieve data. And so server-side APIs consist of one or more publicly exposed endpoints configured to a request response. Oh, hold on. No, Anirudh, it's fine. I'm presenting right now. I think, yeah.
I wasn't able to see your screen actually. Oh, okay.
Really? Hold on. Is my screen not visible?
No, I can't see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah, it's visible.
We can see it now.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, sorry for that. So yeah, basically I was just saying that server-side APIs consist of one or more publicly exposed endpoints configured to a request response message system. And so basically what that is you're going to be making a request for some sort of data and you'll get a response of say the data or an error that you might get. So those are what server-side APIs do. And the responses are usually in what are called a JSON format. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And so basically this is just a standardized way of sending and receiving data over the internet. And so what these are basically they're objects which have different attributes. And so these attributes are basically the data that we're looking for. And so in our response, usually it will be a response.body. So the body of the response is what we are looking for and what we're interested in. And so these are what server-side APIs are. And so I mentioned endpoints, publicly exposed endpoints. And so what these endpoints are, I'll explain right now. So endpoints are specified, they specify where the resources are to be retrieved and where they're supposed to be located from. So these endpoints are associated with URIs, which are uniform resource indicators. And so basically like we saw in the previous part where I said there was an http.get from some URL. What we do is that URL will reference the location on the internet where this data is stored. And what we do is we send a request to that location on the internet, and an HTTP request is made. So an HTTP GET request is basically a request for some kind of data. So even when you're loading like a web page, let's say for Google, like for Google.com, when you type in www.google.com, what your browser does is it makes an HTTP request to the Google servers, and what you get in response is an HTML web page, and that's what's shown on your browser. So in our case, what we're doing with these API endpoints, we make an HTTP GET request to these servers, and what we get in response is a JSON object. And this JSON object will contain the relevant data for us. So since we can't use external packages using Dartpad, this is why we kept this part at the end, and we just use a simulation. So if you're running on Dartpad, I guess you'll just have to watch this last part, and maybe you will share the full code repository at the end, and maybe you could just try that on your local system once you have Flutter installed. But for people who are following along on their own systems, I think Iqjot will run you through the process of importing a package and all that. But basically, how external packages in Flutter work, you can explore them and install them from this website called pub.dev. So we use an HTTP package, which allows us to basically interact with the web, make GET requests to the web. And so where we want to install it and where we will be defining where that we want this specific package, it is defined in this file called pubspec.yaml. I think Ikjot or Shravani, one of you could explain just the basic file directory structure after this. And so this file is where you will be defining all your dependencies and all the external packages that you want imported into your Flutter project. And so what the HTTP package does, which is the package which we will be using now, is it is used to make HTTP GET requests to the web APIs. So using this HTTP package, we can make a GET request and we can get back some sort of response. Whether it is a positive or negative response, we have functions we've defined functions for each possible scenario. So even if there was an error, there will be an error message displayed, right? And so using this HTTP package, we will be getting the response and we will be displaying that body on our application. And that is basically the trivia that we are using. So I think, yeah. So we will check out the final product. And I think Ikjot, if you aren't able to do it, I could just display the final application. That's all there is, right?
Yeah, so I actually figured out how to do it, and
okay, cool.
Yeah, I can go ahead now. So,
Yeah.
So guys, yeah. So as Nishant explained, what we have right now is basically the simulation part only, and now we're going to be implementing the actual number trivia thing, and it's really simple. So what you have to do is, so I'll explain the basic directory structure. So what you get when you make an actual Flutter project is all of this. So this is the name of the project, and these are all the directories inside them. So you don't need to worry about it. There's a lot of stuff, but you don't need to know all of this. There's only some really important stuff which you need to know. That is this lib. So this is where you code everything in your application. For example, all our code was in this main.dart file, which is inside this lib folder. Now we have this thing called a pubspec.yaml, as you can see. So this pubspec.yaml is where you actually put all of your plugins. So a plugin is something that you use to make your life simpler. As a developer, you need to use a lot of plugins so that you can go ahead and code something really fast. So what I have done here is, what you get is this by default. This is the default pubspec.yaml, and the only thing that I've added here is this HTTP with the colon. So this is the plugin that we will be using. And what this plugin actually does is that it helps you make requests to the internet, as Nishant said, and retrieve data or put some data on the internet. So for now, we'll be retrieving the number trivia data that we want. So let's go ahead and actually use this. So all you have to do is add this HTTP over here below this Cupertino icons, and you'll be ready to go. And be careful, this file needs to be indented properly. If it's not, then it'll give some errors. So once this is done, you need to run this pub get, which displays here Flutter command. So you can run this and you'll be able to use this plugin now. All right, so I've already done all of that, so I'm not going to do it again. So now when you want to use a plugin, you have to use this import function, command, and you can use the HTTP from here. So like, as you can see, it gives you a bunch of options and you can select what you want. So I want this http.dart. So I have this http.dart now, and where I want to change the code in this entire application is just here. This is where we are actually doing the simulation. As you see, we are just doing a simulation by waiting for 2 seconds and then sending some number. But we don't want to do that, right? We want to actually send some interesting data. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the data from the internet. And how we do that is like this. So we create a response, which is nothing but a http.get request. And Yeah, so import we have to use as HTTP so that we can use that HTTP word over there. So that's not an issue. You can do that. So now what you have to do here is you have to actually input the URL which you're looking for. So for our case, we are looking at this this thing called a number trivia.com or something. It's right here. So yeah, numbersapi.com, and I'll just copy that because you can get that anyways. So yeah, so there you go. So there is our request to get the data from the internet, and this is where we're sending our number. So when we make this request, right, what we do, we just take this and we send it to the internet. So the internet will give us some interesting fact now. So the number will be replaced by our actual number that we get from the text field. So yeah, so we have this with us now. So we have to await this because it will take some time. It's not a synchronous function, it's an asynchronous. So we have to await this. And once we are done with that, what we have to do is just return this response dot data. So in the actual application, you can't, in actual real world applications, you can't do this because, sorry, I think it's dot body, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So in actual world applications, you can't do this because you get a JSON and you have to parse that and stuff. But since this is a really simple app, you can just do this. So I think if you, if I go ahead and actually display my app right now, I think, let me just check if you guys can see it once. Yeah, guys, can you see the application? Can someone confirm?
Yeah.
All right, so let me just run the app again. And yeah, so I think I can actually make the request now. So let me put a number like, let's say 123, right? So I make the request, I press that number, get trivia, and here you go. You get an interesting fact about 123. It's the medical emergency telephone number in Egypt. So I mean, it's subjective whether you find it interesting or not, but it's a fact. So this is what we received from numbersapi.com, and this is the only change that we had to make. So you understand how easy it is to actually make apps with Flutter. And just for the sake of it, let's just do another one, like 12. 12 is the number of basic hues in the color wheel. So whatever, you get the point. So our app is now ready. And I think there was just one more thing that I wanted to tell, but I forgot to. So one thing is you don't want the user to send some empty data over here. Like for now, if you press get trivia, you don't want the request to go because you won't get back any interesting result, right? So what you want is you got an error because you didn't send anything, right? So what you actually want is that you can to make some sort of validation on this. So it's really simple to do that. And let me just show you. It's just like a line or something over here. Right. So if our number is equal to null or number is empty, then we can just say that 1 second. I think there's some.
Two equal to signs in the number equal.
Oh damn. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. So basically, what you can do now is just say that you can put current status as a text widget that says hey, you have to enter some data and end with it. Otherwise, we'll use an else here. We can do what we were doing before anyways. So let's just do this simulation once and see if it works. So I think if I go ahead and print something, do this now, I press get trivia, it says enter something. So you see how validation works. You have to do all of this when you're developing apps. This is just a very basic example of that. So yeah, I think our work here is done. We have successfully created an app that works. And also, I'll just send this link to you. This is the actual repository, which you can visit and see all the code for yourself, run it on your local machine, whatever you want to do. And So I think, yeah, so I think that's it from our side. Now, guys, if you have any doubts, please let us know.
Yeah. So I think you could see our slide. So yeah, this session is now open for doubts. If you guys have any doubts, you could put in the chat box, or you can, I guess, unmute yourselves and ask the question there. But yeah, thank you for attending this session. We have 2 more sessions from Compsoc at the same time tomorrow and day after. And we hope you attend those as well. And if you have any doubts, you could contact any of us. Our names are here on the screen, and we are on this team. So you could just look out for our names, and you could ping us if you have any doubts after the session as well. So yeah, if there are no doubts, I think we could go ahead and close off this session. So thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you again tomorrow at 6 p.m.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, guys. If you have any doubts, you can reach out to us.
Yeah, I think you can stop recording, Jyot.